everyone, welcome to my channel. So for today's case, I'm going to be talking to you about is the infamous Gainesville Ripper. And this is Danny Rowland. So Daniel Harold Rowland, born May the 26th, 1954, then died on October the 25th, 2006, was known as the infamous Gainesville Ripper. He was an American spree killer. He had murdered 5 students in Gainesville in Florida. Over 4 days in August 1990, Rowland later then confessed to raping several of his victims and committing a triple homicide in his home in the city of Shreveport. And this was in Louisiana, and attempted to murder his father in May 1990. In total, Rowland had confessed to killing 8 people. He was sentenced to death for 5 Gainesville murders in 1994. He was executed by a lethal injection in 2006. As born in Shreveport, Louisiana, his father was Shreveport police officer named James Rowland, and who had told Danny that he was unwanted since his birth. James was also abused and beaten Danny and Danny's mother Claudia and his brother Kevin for frivolous things, such as breathing in a way that displeased him. In one incident, Danny's mother went to the hospital after claiming that her husband tried to make her cut herself with a razor blade. She made repeated attempts to leave her husband, but always returned shortly. In one example of the senior Rowland's sense of discipline, he pinned Danny to the ground and handcuffed him. Then had police taken his son away because he was embarrassed by him. In another story, Danny had a dog, but James beat the dog so often that it died in Danny's arms. As a teenager and a young adult, Rowland was arrested several times for robberies in Georgia, and was caught spying on a woman that was getting dressed. As an adult, he had trouble trying to assimilate into the society and hold down a steady job. At one point, Rowland worked as a waiter at Pancho's restaurant in Bossier City in Louisiana. This is all the details about Danny Rowland. So he was born known as Daniel Harold Rowland, born May the 26th, 1954 in Shreveport, Louisiana in the United States. He died on October the 25th, 2006, age 52, in the Florida State Prison of Rayford in Florida, United States. Cause of death is execution by a lethal injection. His other names he's known by is the Gainesville Ripper and Michael Kennedy Jr. Convictions is first-degree murder of 5 counts. His criminal penalty is a death sentence. The span of his crimes is 1989 to 1990. And he was in the United States, in Louisiana and Florida. He was apprehended on September the 7th, 1990. In August 1990, Rowland murdered 5 students, 1 from Santa Fe College and 4 from the University of Florida, during a burglary and robbery spree in Gainesville, and this was in Florida. He mutilated his victims' bodies, decapitating one. He then posed them, sometimes using mirrors. In early morning hours of Friday, August 24th, Rowland broke into an apartment shared by a 17-year-old university freshman, Sonja Larson and Christina Powell. Finding Powell asleep on the downstairs couch, he stood over her briefly, but did not wake her up, choosing instead to explore the upstairs bedroom where Larson was also asleep. Rowland murdered Larson first, taping her mouth shut to stifle her screams, then stabbing her to death with a Ka-bar knife. She then died trying to fend him off. Rowland then went back downstairs, taped Powell's mouth shut, bound her wrists together behind her back, and threatened her with a knife as he cut her clothes off. He then raped her and forced her face down onto the floor, where he stabbed her 5 times in the back. Rowland posed the bodies in a sexually provocative position. He took a shower before leaving the apartment. A day later, on Saturday, August the 25th, Rowland broke into an apartment of 18-year-old Krista Hoyt, prying open a sliding glass door with a screwdriver. Finding she was not home, he waited in the living room for her to return at 11 a.m. Hoyt entered the apartment and Rowland surprised her from behind, placing her in a chokehold. After she had been subdued, he used duct tape to gag her mouth and bind her wrists together behind her back, then led her into the bedroom where he cut off the clothes from her body and then raped her. As in the Powell murder, he forced her to lie face down onto the bed and stabbed her in the back, rupturing her aorta. He then flipped her body over and sliced her abdomen open from her pubic bone right up to her breastbone. After arriving back at the campsite, Rowland could not find his wallet. Thinking he may have lost it at the murder scene, he returned there, at which time he decapitated Hoyt, posed her body in a sitting position at the edge of her bed, and placed her head on a shelf facing the corpse. He later claimed his intent was to add to the shock of whoever had discovered her. By this point, the murders had attracted widespread media attention. Many students had begun taking extra precautions, such as changing their daily routines and sleeping together in groups, because the spree was happening so early in the fall of semester. Some students withdrew their enrollment or transferred to other schools. Tracy Paules, who was 23 years of age, who was living with her roommate Manny Taboda, also aged 23. On Monday, August 27th, Rowland broke into their apartment by prying open the sliding glass door with the same tools he had previously used. Rowland found Taboda asleep in one of the bedrooms and killed him after a struggle. Hearing the commotion, Paules went down to the hall to Taboda's bedroom and saw Rowland. She attempted to barricade herself in her bedroom, but Rowland broke through the door. Rowland taped her mouth and wrists and cut off her clothing and raped her before turning her over and stabbing her 3 times in the back. Rowland posed Paules's body but left Taboda in the same position in which he had died. With the exception of Taboda, all of the victims were petite, white brunettes with brown eyes like Rowland's mother. Although law enforcement initially had very few leads, police did identify 2 suspects. One suspect was Edward Lewis Humphrey, a University of Florida student who had the history of mental illness and bore numerous scars on his face from a car accident. Humphrey was arrested after a physical altercation with his grandmother and held in custody for 5 months, until a grand jury refused to indict him on the murder charges, citing insufficient evidence. Humphrey's photo was shown repeatedly by media outlets. Authorities publicized and cleared him of all charges after Rowland's arrest. The other suspect was also later cleared. The Shreveport murders and tip about Rowland. Louisiana police alerted Florida authorities to an unsolved triple murder in Shreveport on November 4th, 1989. Detectives noticed that there were similarities between the Gainesville murders and those of 55-year-old Tom Grissom, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and his 8-year-old grandson Sean. The family had been attacked in their home as they were preparing for dinner. Afterwards, Julie Grissom's body had been mutilated, cleaned, and posed. Don Maines, an investigator on the case with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, traveled to Shreveport in November 1990 because of similarities between the murders committed in Gainesville and the murders that was committed in Shreveport. They included posing of the victims, tape residue on victim's body, vinegar used to clean the body. Maine said that they tested the body fluids from a perpetrator in Shreveport and found that this person also had the type B blood. He called the match to the evidence in Gainesville a revelation in the case. Shortly after Maine's trip to Shreveport, a Shreveport resident, Cindy Jurisic, called Crime Stoppers and reported that Danny Rowland was possibly connected to the murders in both cities. 3 months earlier, in August 1990, Jurisic heard a news report about a string of murders as she travelled through the Florida panhandle. The report made her think about Rowland, whom she met in her Louisiana hometown church, and is possible linked to these 3 other Shreveport murders. Rowland had said deeply disturbing things to both her and then her husband, which was called Stephen Dobbin. He come over every night for a while, and then one night Stephen came in and he goes, "He's got to go," Jurisic said. She also said that Dobbin told her that Rawlings had told him that he had a problem. I said, "What kind of problem?" Jurisic said, and Stephen said, "He likes to stick knives into people." Jurisic said she dismissed these comments when she heard about them because she didn't want to believe Rowland could be responsible for the murders in Shreveport. Rowland had also told her, "One day I'm going to leave this town and I am going to go where the girls are beautiful and I can just lay in the sun and watch beautiful women all day." News of the Gainesville murders haunted Jurisic, so she finally contacted police in November based on a hunch about Rowland's connection to the murders in both cities. "It would not let me rest," she said. "One day I picked up the phone, I called Crime Stoppers and I said, 'I think there's one guy you all need to investigate. His name is Danny Rowland.'" Investigators responded to the tip and quickly found Rowland, who had been arrested on September the 7th, 1990 for an Ocala, Florida supermarket robbery. The robbery had been committed 10 days after the bodies of Perez and Taboada were found. Rowland was being held in the Marion County Jail, 40 miles south of Gainesville. Investigators determined that Rowland had type B blood, like the suspect in both the Gainesville and Shreveport murders. Once Florida investigators realized that Rowland had multiple convictions for armed robbery, they realized he could have also been responsible for the bank robbery that occurred on the day Krista Hoyt's body had been found. They returned to the evidence locker with a gun, screwdriver, bag of money, cassette player had all been stored, and listened to the tape. They also found tools matching marks left at the Gainesville murder scenes, and the small camp where he had been living was in a wooded area that was near an apartment complex that frequented by students. Investigators discovered audio diaries that he had made that were very alluding to the crimes. Later, it was discovered that on August the 5th, 1990, Rowland broke into the home of Janet Frake in Sarasota, Florida. He bound and gagged her with tape and he sexually assaulted her, but he did not kill her. November 1991, Rowland was charged with 5 counts of murder. He was brought to trial near 4 years after the murders. He claimed that his motives was to become a superstar, similar to Ted Bundy. In 1994, before his trial could get underway, Rowland unexpectedly pleaded guilty to all charges. Subsequently, State Attorney Rod Smith presented the penalty phase of this prosecution. During his trial, Court TV conducted an interview with Rowland's mother from her home, during which his father could be heard shouting off camera. April 20th, 1994, Rowland was sentenced to death. Rowland was diagnosed with antisocial personal disorder, borderline personality disorder, and paraphilia. Shortly before he was executed in Florida for the series of killings in Gainesville, Rowland had then claimed responsibility for the Shreveport murders, handing his spiritual advisor Reverend Mike Hudspeth and Florida police a handwritten confession and an apology. Rowland had a last meal of lobster tail, he sang a gospel hymn, but made no statement immediately before his execution, which he had witnessed by many of his victims' relatives. Rowland was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison on October 25th, 2006, after the U.S. Supreme Court rejected a last-ditch appeal. He was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. EDT time. Rowland had been the subject of several written works. His crime spree inspired screenwriter Kevin Williamson to pen the script of the 1996 slasher film called Scream. Sandra London collaborated with Rowland on the making of A Serial Killer, the true story of the Gainesville murders in the killer's own words. Rowland's relationship with London, which developed while he was behind bars, was the focus of an episode of Errol Morris, The First Person. Rowland and London became romantically involved, eventually even becoming engaged. The series overviewed their romance, his artwork, and his supposed feelings of remorse over the crimes he committed. It also included a segment of Rowland using one of his earrings as an opportunity to publicly display his affection, serenading London into the courtroom. 2007 independent feature film titled The Gainesville Ripper, based on accounts of the killings, was shot in Gainesville and in Jacksonville. This is the Florida areas. In the film, Rowland is portrayed by Zachary Memos. Rowland was also the subject of an episode of Body of Evidence from the case files of Dale Hinman, a court TV show transmitted as Crime Scene USA, Body of Evidence on Discovery Channel in the UK, and an episode of Forensic Factor titled The Killing Spree, which originally aired on Discovery Channel in Canada and was rebroadcasted in America on the Science Channel. Rowland was the subject of a 2010 episode of Cold Blood. Briefly was mentioned in 2012 episode of Motives and Murders titled Not Again. He was featured in 2015 episode of Nightmare Next Door. In 2013, the TV documentary series The Real Story aired in an episode which is called Profiling the Movie Scream. It aired on July 28th, which is in 2013, and tells the story of Rowland's murder in a very graphic detail. The book Drifter is based on the 1990 Gainesville murders. The song Harold Rowland's hymn from 2007 John 5 album, The Devil Knows My Name, is inspired by Rowling. An episode of Murder Made Me Famous, which aired November 24th, 2018, chronicled the case. The premiere episode of Mark of a Killer, titled Pose to Kill, was documented in the case. In 2020, the WUFT News released a television special and a podcast with special chronicling thoughts. And this was on the case 30 years later, titled 4 Days, 5 Murders. In 2021, an episode of the ABC Primetime True Crime television series on 2020 aired the murder case. On January 14th, 2022, Discovery Plus then premiered the paranormal documentary Scream. The True Story, starring Steve Shippey and Cindy Kaza. Shippey and Kaza conducted a paranormal investigation in Rawlins' childhood home in Shreveport. This was in Louisiana. While on death row at Florida State Prison, Rawlins wrote songs and poems and drew pictures. His works are example of murderabilias. Okay then, so that is the well-known Gainesville Ripper case. If you all enjoyed it, please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.